Welcome to the Whole Marketer podcast, where we look at the holistic skills and behaviours, the technical skills, soft and human, leadership skills, and personal understanding that marketers need to grow the brands and businesses of tomorrow. I'm Abby Dixon, your host, author and founder of The Whole Marketer, and director of our marketing capability and transformation consultancy, where we work with passionate marketing leaders to provide the clarity, support, empowerment, and inspiration needed to build successful and fulfilled marketing teams. Hello and welcome to the Whole Marketer podcast. Today's episode is a Shine the Light episode. We'll be discussing the role of marketers today and many of the factors that are impacting marketers' morale. Shortly, I'll welcome today's guest, no other than Charlotte Rogers, onto the podcast. But before I do, let me tell you why this is so important. Many of you may know the reason I started the Whole Marketer podcast is because I was constantly seeing marketers that were feeling overwhelmed and unfulfilled. And my goal today is to make sure that marketers and marketing teams are successful and fulfilled in all they do. As many of you may know, I'm a columnist for Marketing Week, where I aim to shine the light on many of the unspoken issues within the profession, from burnout to the true skills and behaviours that I believe marketers really need to adopt, for example, humility, or to face into some of those common challenges that are preventing us from realising our true potential and for marketing to lead the long-term commercial agenda. For example, clarity, or facing into the lack of resource within our profession. Charlotte and I often talk at length behind the scenes on the findings of studies or common themes that we are seeing and that we need to explore further for our profession. We often discuss hypotheses or the root cause behind what's happening. And given the unfortunately not surprising results from the latest Marketing Week's career survey, I thought it'd be great to get Charlotte on for you to hear more about those findings and explore and share those root causes together to not only shine a light, but also to start the dialogue about what we can do as a profession to make things better. Charlotte Rogers, although needs no introduction, is the Deputy Managing Editor and Head of Insight at Marketing Week. She's responsible for long-form content. She leads on the publication's proprietary research projects, as well as the wider features, and is the co-host of the Marketing Week podcast, as well as an all-round wonderful human being. Charlotte, welcome to the Whole Marketer podcast.
Oh, Abby, I cannot tell you how excited I am. I love the podcast. And I just want to say thank you so much to you. We do have those conversations often. I love getting your perspective on the data that we have because it comes back and there's just so many human stories in there that I kind of need to unpick. And that's why I love being able to talk to experts like you. So thank you so much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. And I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, as you know, as someone who listens to the podcast, we always start with a big, juicy question. And today's big, juicy question is a massive one. Are you ready?
Yeah.
What are you seeing as the role that marketers are playing today and the key changes around the role that they're playing today?
You weren't joking when you said a juicy question. Honestly, I am seeing, and I think that the data shows this and kind of proves what we all knew was going on. Remits expanding, leaders being cut from teams and not replaced, high level of restructure that's almost can be going on straight for about 6 years, certainly in COVID, and it's kind of actually in many cases accelerated. Disruption is rife. So we asked, like, just as a kind of baseline, we've been asking for the past 6 years, what sort of changes have you seen in the marketing department? And this is our 2026 career and salary survey, which is over 2,300 marketers. So it's a really good sample of people. And half have been in teams that have restructured. So the disruption, and that's pretty much consistent. Like every year we see half or above of the people responding saying our teams are changing. We've had teams being merged with other departments. That's for a quarter. Specialisms being removed, specialists being added. And I wonder whether there's just so much change going on that actually people are just running to kind of keep still. And there's this sense that I get, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but that some marketers are being set up to fail with really unrealistic expectations. So I was so lucky to speak to you for the research, but I also spoke to Richard Clark, who is he was CMO at Sephora, but he's also the founder of Bootster, which is like an agency and strategic marketing agency. And he was talking to me about how people saying that actually now they see job specs and they have no idea what they mean. So what they're asking for from marketers is an absolutely ridiculous, from I need to be a salesperson, I need to be a designer, I need to be an e-commerce specialist. Oh no, I actually need to be a social specialist. Like, it's these ridiculous remits, these job specs that he said were written by people who often maybe in HR don't necessarily understand the role of marketing. And then also he was talking about the pay being really out of whack. And I know you've spoken to me about this as well, this idea of like sort of what would have been like, maybe head of marketing. They don't understand. They're being asked to do more, but for less, for considerably less. And they're going through, he talked about brands basically trying to save money and get 7 people for the price of 1. So I think, we're 100% seeing that idea of you've got to be everything to all people in many cases. And for some people, you know, with the job market being how it is, they're either staying in roles where they're really unhappy or they're struggling to find something else. Richard talked to me about people being out of work for 2 years plus. I know you'll have seen that in your own work. So I think we've got this idea of people being strained and having these ridiculous remits, not knowing where they sit or what kind of the remit should really be. And just to kind of finish as well on this point, just that we asked whether people are thinking of leaving marketing. And what we saw there was some really interesting, I think, go to this question of what's going on for people. So one person said, culturally, it's getting harder to deliver marketing that delivers results. Stakeholders want to see proof of ROI before you're even allowed to ask for budget. The circularity means meaningful work gets less investment, marketing becomes less effective, and marketing gets treated like a cost center. Other people talked about poor compensation, lack of opportunity. And this comment from the free tech really stuck out for me. I'm no longer enjoying it. Measuring KPIs and keeping up with trends is exhausting. At the age of 27, I feel like I've aged out of this career.
It is astounding. It really is astounding. And I see all the things that you talk about. I see senior roles disappearing. Is it a cost saving exercise? Is it that the business isn't ready for marketing to be at the boardroom in a senior role, which I would completely disagree. It completely should be. I'm seeing marketers with that senior level going, having to step up and have more accountability and responsibility, maybe without the skill set or being ready to take that step up. So they're now leading a team and having to have board level conversations, as you just said, to secure investment, which they've never done before. We've definitely seen an increase of people wanting support at that level. So the most senior marketer kind of going, I'm now in this position. There was a CMO, a marketing director above me. I'm now head of, and I'm now having to do acting responsibility. So that comes with increased stress, increased pressure, because you're not necessarily ready to do that role, or you're having to step up very quickly to do that role, whilst trying to set the direction for the business and a long-term strategy, whilst trying to set it for the team, whilst trying to steady the team while they're seeing changes and job cuts happening. I'm seeing a lot of teams where they have recruitment freeze. So people that are leaving or have been cut and not be able to be replaced. And so you've got a department's been asked to do more with literal less. And then, as you said, people that are out of role looking for another role because there's such a pool of people out there. They're almost not necessarily having the same salary expectations. I know people that have been out of role they're looking for a new role, and the salary is nowhere near where it used to be historically for them in their previous roles. So they're now going, so where does it allow me to sit? And I think because there's a big pool of people without of work, it's almost like people have got wind of that and are trying to kind of not take advantage, but are leveraging that. And so I think you have got a whirlpool. And I think the expectation there that you said there about demonstrating effectiveness, we should have always been demonstrating effectiveness. To move from being a support function to one leading the long-term commercial agenda, from being a cost center to being the one that drives growth and profitable growth, and to one that goes from spending money to investing money, we should always be demonstrating that. But I do think that is a skill gap that we still haven't addressed fully. We've got a little bit better because of things like performance marketing that have metrics, or maybe some metrics around the activities that we do and sharing those. But unfortunately, those don't always translate into that commercial benefit for the business. And so they're not laddering in. And some marketers are not able to demonstrate how they ladder in. How driving reach will drive penetration gains, which will drive profitable growth, which will drive ultimately, delivering the commercial goals. And so we have that gap. And without that, we are seen as the ones spending and the ones that are maybe not as important as other functions. You don't see CFOs disappearing, you don't see headcount reductions and and many other functions. Although I'm not an expert in other functions, I don't see that parity happening, or people's, as you said, salaries being cut, or that kind of market rate or value, or more expected from them in a role for less money. You don't see it.
You honestly don't, Abby. And it's so interesting you would say that, because that's always my yardstick is finance. I always think, okay, I don't know. It's not finance week, but I always feel like no one ever questions the CFO's role. Why are they there? Like, what are they doing? It's like a given. They don't have to justify their existence all the time. They don't have to have this sort of questioning of their skill set. And I think that's really, really interesting as well, because everything you were saying there is so consistent with what we're seeing in our being reported back by the community. And we actually asked, I think a lot of this sort of, what is my remit? What am I here to do? This questioning, do I have to, be an e-commerce specialist as well as a social specialist, as well as strategic thinker, is making marketers question their skill set. So it's not a very large number, but 13.6% of our samples said that they don't feel like they have the right combination of skills that businesses are looking for.
Mm.
And that's the highest we've seen that. And obviously higher than we would want anyone to feel like. And I think what we're seeing is concerns around being left behind on skills, the AI agenda, obviously, and a bit of a self-consciousness about being a generalist. We see that. So people, like, this is in the free text, but people say, I'm a marketing generalist, but there's too much to learn, and I feel like a lack of deep skill makes me feel inadequate. Or another person saying, a combination of my age, tenure in my career, and my knowledge, I feel like I need to be more well-versed on AI or kind of different things. And I feel like my age and salary expectations will make it really hard to find a new job. So I felt like you've got people, questioning their own sort of ability unfairly, I feel. And then dealing with, what is this expanding remit with less people? I'm scared to go out in the job market because it could take me, 2 years to find a role. And how demoralizing that is. And we sort of know that actually, that the marketers feel like, is it even worth making that leap? Because I don't know if I'll get a job at the end of it, and people are actually leaving the industry.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to see what stats you have on people leaving the industry, because I always used to say there was like this age bracket that I would see leave. And I have my own theories as to why, as someone in that age bracket now. I also think you are right on that. Marketers always feel like they don't have the right skills, because that was the same issue that I found as one of the root causes when I was writing the whole marketer book. And then one of the reasons why I wrote it was because there was always so much changing. There's always latest thinking. There is always new approaches. And it's great. One of the things I love about the profession is that, it's ever changing. You're always having to learn something new. But learning something new when you're in a role where you're already stretched, and having to have enough knowledge at least about what that trend or latest thinking is, and whether you want to adopt it into the business or into your daily practice, takes time and effort. And we don't all have the time and effort to do that. Hence why every podcast season, I always put late ones on latest thinking, so at least people are informed about what it is. But I think you're right about that point about AI, like the pressure to go, so what are we going to do with AI? And I can imagine the questions that are being asked, how are we going to use AI? Content production, or within our strategy, or as a way in which to have automated services with our customers, or. And in fact, I was asked to speak at an event a couple of months ago, and they were like, "Oh, can you come and talk about the skill set the marketers need?" I was like, "Absolutely." And I actually had a massive slide that was like, yes, AI is important. I'm not dismissing that, but we have these core gaps still within our profession. I see it in the work that I do when training marketers. I see it in the work that I do when assessing marketers. We still have strategic gaps. We still have commercial acumen gaps. We still have marketing effectiveness gaps. So we really need to almost like address those core skills whilst keeping abreast of the changes, and making sure that we know enough so that we can keep informed, but almost I don't want to say not worry about it, but I think the focus should be on those core skills, because I think they're the things gonna allow you to feel more confident in a meeting where you are being seen as the spend function, or in a meeting where budget is being cut, because you'll be able to have the commercial acumen to argue it or the effectiveness to demonstrate it. So, yeah, it's not surprising, Charlotte, and it's not surprising people feel overwhelmed by it. And, we have had advancements in the understanding of what we now know. So let's just say behavioral science. And in fact, it's quite funny. I went for a trip down memory lane the last couple of weekends. We decided to clear out the attic. In fact, I found an article written by you. I think it was like in 2017 that I'd kept, which was about, honestly, I feel like I'd want to dig it out and bring it. And it was about the the role of the marketer, and you had like it was an image of a doll, and it was all the classic skills that I'd ripped that out at the time, so I'd kept it. And it's like, some of those core things that you talked about then are still there. And so it's like, we know it, but what are we going to do to close it? And it's broader than just strategic thinking. And that comes from someone who loves strategic thinking, who loves to trade strategy and burning out. I know we spoke offline about some of the findings. I'd love for you to share them with the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So for 2 years now, we've been looking at kind of mental health, and the burnout crisis that we actually, I mean, frankly, it is, and we discussed that ourselves, between ourselves. It is this idea of like marketers kind of being on the brink. So last year and this year, we sort of asked around imposter syndrome and mental health. So we found that basically 85% of marketers have experienced imposter syndrome in their career. And for 50%, those feelings had intensified over the past 12 months. And we also sort of broke down, and this was something I'd kind of learned from you as well, be this idea of like the symptoms of burnout. So like true burnout being this horrific destination that people are getting to, but kind of breaking it down and saying, okay, what elements of burnout are you experiencing? And that's something that we tried to do here. So it wasn't a confronting question. It was kind of saying, have you felt overwhelmed, undervalued, etc. So over the past 12 months, we found that 65% of marketers have felt overwhelmed. 53% are just not enjoying work that used to engage them. Another 53% have this feel a detached or negative attitude towards their work. And 47% feel a sense of ineffectiveness. And those numbers, especially at the top end of the kind of overwhelmed, undervalued and emotionally exhausted, are higher than last year. But we had a new question where we asked, do you feel like you could tell your manager or the wider business how you're feeling? And over two-fifths, 42% said no. So we've got this kind of idea of people feeling like actually, they are on the brink, and they're questioning, they kind of feel like in their role, they're sort of questioning, have I got a right to be here? Why am I here? That, there's a confidence issue there, but also they are running on empty, and they're getting to a point where, they may have to completely leave the industry. And sort of when we ask people like why they wouldn't feel like they could talk about their mental health, there was some really interesting reasons. So people talked about the pressure to always perform, the fear that it would hinder their progression. They also saw that, when they said things, or they kind of needed support, a new recruit or something in the team, it just wasn't happening. And they felt like they couldn't get any time with their manager to even have that conversation. And it just became to the point where it was so uncomfortable. Other people talked about how actually they felt the need to maintain a good perception of marketing. So they were carrying on their shoulders this idea of, we've got to defend the industry. Therefore, I can't say I'm not coping, or push back, I can't do this task, or even question it, because they felt like that would denigrate marketing even further in their organization. And I found that really telling, because it was like, you're not only carrying your own feelings, but you feel like having to defend
It makes me
the
feel really
industry.
sad. I'm sat here thinking about an
Yeah.
individual who is feeling overwhelmed, who is potentially facing technical burnout or full burnout, who is thinking about their team and that they need more resource, not only for themselves, but for the rest of the team, so that they don't burn out, not feeling psychologically safe enough to share that, feeling that if they did, that would have impact not on themselves personally, but on how marketing is perceived within their organization, and even bigger, on how marketing is perceived as a profession in the industry. Like that, oosh, that's a lot. In fact, I feel quite emotional, Charlotte. That's quite a lot, right? So if you are also have caring responsibilities, or you have something significant happening in your personal life, or you're having to manage or deal with something else, everything from kind of young children and moving house to some grief or something significantly sorry, that sounds really bad, like it's not significant, when we could all be dealing with anything at any given time. As I always say, you never know what someone's going through, whether that's caring responsibilities or a loss of a loved one or relationship breakdown or house move or renovation, like all these things that cause stress on top of these pressures at work. It's a lot. It's a lot, and I know for a lot of people when they're going through change, work is their certainty, right? It's the thing that they know how to do well and gives them stability. And so that pressure, not wanting to be there, not feeling like you can do that thing in a time of change with the change happening around you. No wonder it just feels too much for everybody. Feels too much for everybody. And I think you're right around how that will look for marketing. 'Cause I know that one of the things that you uncovered was around the repositioning of the role itself. So chief growth officer roles coming into play, or changes in how they're being positioned or the seniority of them. It's that we've still got this perception issue that people almost like now personally carrying, like, oosh, that's just too much.
I know, I know, I completely agree. And it's such an interesting point that you'd make that because so we found this sort of tweaking, this kind of job title semantics going on, which I think is contributing to this sense of imposter syndrome. Even if you're not the most senior marketer and you see that happening to your senior leader, you'd be thinking, okay, why is marketing not enough? So we found that so in 20% of the people we spoke to in their teams, they'd seen the senior leader cut and not replaced. And there were kind of different reasons for that. The main one was to save on wages, or there'd been a hire, but it wasn't a like for like replacement. And there was a sense as well of really poor succession planning. So this idea of not really thinking through the future looks like for their marketing team. So you've got that disruption of senior leaders and not being replaced and these kind of strange sort of difficult reasons why. But then we also found like root sort of motivations behind job titles being introduced. So where chief growth officer was 3 times as likely to be introduced into a team as like a chief customer officer, and it was more likely than a CMO. And when we asked people like, why are you making changes to your team? Restructure was the main one, but actually 23, nearly 24% said it was an effort to redefine marketing. This idea that if you say, okay, we don't have a CMO anymore, it's actually a chief growth officer, that suddenly you're saying something about the standing of marketing or what marketing is there to achieve. No longer, and this is in no way, the case for every business, but this idea of like the chief customer officer falling down that order of like priority as a job title. Well, again, what does that say? It's this idea of like, you wouldn't have a CFO, right? There might be finance director or a CFO, but that's that. This idea of like, well, if we change and we tweak, we're going to redefine what marketing means. It's very destabilizing, like you say. And I think it speaks to, well, why is marketing in itself not enough?
Yeah, and it's that classic, repositioning of the role, changing the title. Almost it's like, is it education? Is it if we say chief customer officer, we explain through the job title that, we're here to identify, anticipate, and satisfy the wants and needs of customers profitably. Okay, so you got that bit now. So let's try and change the role again. If we call ourselves chief growth officer, then the fact that we should be writing the strategy and driving the growth engine of the business, sustainable growth engine of the business, may I add, then that reflects the strategic role and everything that we do that allows us to bring growth to the business. Yeah, it's opposed to actually the education around what marketing truly does. And the fact we have to change the job title to almost help get credibility almost within an organization for that to be the case. But you're right, that change in job title is going to make other people that already feel that they don't have the skill set do question whether they have the skill set to be a chief growth officer. Is it the same skill set? Is it different? Or is it the skill set that they should have had already, which is around setting that long term vision, the strategy, the key areas of growth, really funneling the focus of where that growth is going to come from, strategic priorities? I could go on and on. Is it that? I think marketers should be doing that anyways. So, is it a repositioning in some organizations that's now created a knock on impact in the industry? Maybe, maybe. And as you said, there's lessening roles, which I think is a worrying sign and a really saddening sign, because I think we fought so hard for so long to get marketing on the board. And to lose those board roles, or to lose those really senior roles that have all of the skill set to do that, and as you said, being replaced with the ones that are lesser, is not going to change that perception issue. It's not. It's really not.
No, it's not. And actually, one other data point that might be interesting to this as well is we asked about, this is what we've asked for years and years. We slightly tweaked the question, but it's around the understanding gap. So we said, like, what is the perception of marketing? How is it viewed by, and in this case, we actually narrowed it down to the CEO, MD in your company. And nearly 50% said marketing is somewhat understood, but still education is needed to appreciate its true value. So, I mean, and for 13%, they said marketing is not understood at all and is seen as a cost. So obviously, you've got nearly half of marketers saying, the thing is, I think they only sort of really understand what we're doing and they don't truly understand the value. And I think, again, that's just playing to that whole, you're tweaking job titles, we're losing leaders, we feel like, imposters, we're having to constantly justify, we're exhausted, and now we're not really sure why we're doing this. So yeah, I thought that kind of persistent lack of understanding is really interesting.
Yeah, lack of clarity. Lack of clarity will do it to us personally in our private lives, right? Let alone in our working lives. If we don't know imagine how some people even feel unsettled if they don't know what they're doing at the weekend. So imagine rocking up to work every day going, I don't know what I'm meant to be doing in my role. I don't know if what I'm doing is going to matter. I don't know if what I'm doing is wanted, or the thing that I'm doing is going to change. I see so much pivoting and changing. People maybe writing a strategy and just the priorities or the performance or something changes so frequently that plans go out the window, constantly having to pivot, deal with setbacks. Setbacks needs a level of resilience and energy and well-being in order to manage and deal with that. So they're probably processing that request, that they got Monday morning, whilst trying to think what they need to do very quickly because everyone's looking at them by Tuesday afternoon, while still delivering the thing that's in market, while still trying to keep team motivated to be, going, it's fine, keep doing what you're doing. It really is too much. It really is too much. And those root causes around why people feel overwhelmed, unfulfilled, having imposter syndrome, wanting to lead the profession, not surprising. Did you know that The Whole Marketer is not only a podcast and book, but also a marketing capability and transformation consultancy, with trusted partners to many leading household brands, empowering their marketers with the holistic skills and behaviours through our training courses, workshops and leadership programs, providing support and fulfilment through coaching, mentoring and our trusted advisor work, and providing inspiration through our talks and keynotes. We work with passionate marketing leaders, helping them define and gain that all-important clarity through vision setting and strategy development. Through our capability consultancy, we define the future role of marketing, define the required skills and behaviours, the ways of working, infrastructure, processes and much, much more to ensure your team are able to deliver against that future role aspiration. We partner with you through each stage of the transformation journey to step change not only your team's capabilities, but also to empower those marketeers in your care to lead that long-term commercial agenda and deliver on the true potential of marketing. So if you're a passionate marketer or marketing leader who wants to develop themselves and the marketeers in their care holistically to help them not only be successful in what they do, but also fulfilled, then we're here to help. Find out more at thewholemarketer.com. Right, let's get back to that conversation. It's funny, actually. I'm just thinking about another analogy. You and I always pull the parallel to finance officer, but I'm just kind of pulling the parallel to the medical world here for a second. Now, admittedly, we're not saving lives, right? But the pay gap for doctors, the hours that they have to work is highlighted. The conditions in which they have to work is highlighted. They've got so much change happening around them, lack of funding, lack of investment. It's almost like some parallel there as well. It's like people have to be able to have the tools to do the job, the skills to do the job, the clarity about why we're doing the job, to have the motivation, the clarity to know what limited resource we have left is being allocated to what. And, doing more with less investment, with less resources, with maybe not clear ways of working, maybe at pace that isn't sustainable. Not maybe, with a pace that's not sustainable. The pace in which we deliver to market has changed. It's just too much. It really is too much. And I suppose I'm sitting here, as you and I, we talk about this quite a lot offline. It's so what are we going to do differently? Because it's not surprising to me, the burnout facts. It's not surprising to me, the imposter facts. It's not surprising that people feel overwhelmed. I was really saddened to hear that people want to leave the profession, um, as someone who is really passionate about it. But what is it that we are going to do? When do we say no? When do we start pushing back and saying, do you know what? If you want to reduce my team or reduce headcount or not give me enough investment, this is what I can deliver for you in that time with the resource I have, and say no until people start to understand there is a repercussion for the reduction in resource, reduction in investment, the impact on people's mental health, the impact on people's energy and well-being. Because if we don't say no, we're just going to carry on doing what we've always done.
I think that's such a good point, Abby. And I feel like saying no is the hardest thing to do, especially when you feel like, yeah, I am fighting for my life here on this job. Like, and this kind of pressure that we talked about earlier, this idea that I don't want to denigrate like the impression marketing by saying that I'm struggling or I need more. We found that over half, 51% of our sample said that they've seen the remit of roles grow without a necessary increase in remuneration. They said, this is kind of a direct quote from the free text. Almost all roles have grown without pay. Everyone is taking on more. Someone here who was like the only marketer in a team, so solo marketer, and tasked with jobs only tangentially related because I'm the closest person to the functionality by default. So graphic design, like doing sales stuff, presentations. And it gets to the point where it's like, is this strategic and is this in the service of the business? Or is it just busy work that people need me to do? But I think there's also this thing of that I think we need to confront. But just like the progression crisis, I think is something where if we're going to say no, then saying no is also saying, you have not progressed me to a point where these things you're asking me to do is fair. So we found that the majority of marketers, so basically 70% said they had experienced no career progression over the past year. And by that, we're saying promotion, sideways move, new job, expanded remit, nothing. And do you see the opportunity for progression in your organization over the next 12 months? 54.5% no. So we've got a huge level of people who, their careers are stagnating. They're being asked to do more, but it's not with a new job title. It's not with more money. And I think what we're also seeing, and it's something that we asked for the first time, but I think it's playing a really big role in here, is what's happening for parents. So we've never asked this before, and it was something I was really passionate about getting into. I felt like we had the sort of permission to ask it. Actually, we've been doing career and salary survey for decades, over 2 decades. I really wanted to understand what was happening for parents. So we found that if we're facing a progression crisis in general, which we are, it is absolutely heightened for parents. 72% of working parents in marketing said they had seen no progression. And when you break that down by gender, it is stark. And I think that's worth thinking is 72% of our sample are female. So not to say that everyone will become a mother or father, but we know like it's 80% of people do. And you've got, so you've got a career, an industry that has no problem really attracting women, but has a really big problem retaining them for multiple reasons. And one of them is obviously this. So we found that 44.6% of mothers said that being a parent had harmed their progression. Only 7.6% of fathers. We found 14% of mothers said they'd been forced to take on a more junior role, and only 3% of fathers. And we found over a third of mothers said that being a parent had prevented them from applying for a role versus 13% of fathers. And 7% of mothers had taken a pay cut versus 0.8% of fathers. And I make the gender distinction not to say, to kind of point out, oh, isn't it so much harder for women versus men? Although obviously this is what it's showing. It's showing that there are fundamental problems, societal problems, and the way that businesses are set up that are not supporting the careers of people with caring responsibilities. And we don't ask that. So we don't know about people who obviously also layer on looking after parents, maybe looking after siblings, other things that are happening in their lives, like you discussed, Abby. So we've got this progression crisis that is heightened for parents, that is heightened for mothers. And it's like, where is this actually working for people? Because it feels like there are so many ways where this just isn't working.
It's, just from a personal experience. I was talking about this with someone who's got a toddler at the moment and deciding to do consultancy to get some more flexibility. And I was thinking about I've got a teenager now, but returning to work, asking for less days or flexible working a decade ago, more than a decade ago, was not rare, isn't the right word, but you were really asking for something that wasn't the norm. I think that's how to say it. And the people that did come back to work, on lesser days, as you said, potentially in a lesser role. And so, you've got levels of fulfillment there because you're not being able to use all the skills that you have, potentially returning to work, not feeling or feeling different because you've been out of the workforce, for a period of time during maternity leave and now doing a lesser role. It can all feel a lot. I have seen some good signs though. And I think COVID has helped in some way. Not that we need a pandemic. Well, I mean, it's sad, isn't it, that we needed a pandemic to do this, but it has allowed us to show that we can work flexibly. We can be there for the moments that matter with our children or for people that we care for or whoever else is important in our life and still return back to work and still do our hours and still do our jobs. Um, and I'm seeing, lots of shifts in cultures as a result. So people are doing that or blocking meetings or speaking about it very openly as opposed to hiding it. Is it where it needs to be fully reflective of all the flexible working requests and all the great work that's out there? No. Um, is it getting better? Maybe. But actually, is it sustainable? And I do remember someone when I returned to work saying to me, you want to take a role where when you're reading Julia Donaldson at night, which I did read a lot of Julia Donaldson, you're not also thinking about your job. So you can be fully present. And I think, in fact, I don't think, I know from all the conversations I had with people and for myself when I was at that stage, you're not. You're trying to be and you're not. Because you're thinking you're going to turn that laptop back on. You've got a presentation deck or a one pager that you've got to present the next day, or something else that you need to prepare for, or you're catching up on something you didn't because of something else. So I don't think we work any less hours or any less productive, but there are definitely challenges. And I think the organizations that provide flexibility, I think, are the ones that know that flexibility is something that people don't want to negotiate on, potentially moving to another organization which culture isn't known, all those flexible things that a normal pattern in a working ways of working amongst the team. So they stay. Because they stay and they're good, they get more responsibility and don't necessarily progress to more senior roles. And as we said earlier, senior roles, there are less of them. And I also see a lot of people not moving because they see the pool of people that are out of work. In fact, I had someone ask me the other day, I've got all these challenges at work. Are these what you're seeing in other organizations? And I said, yeah, they're similar issues. And she was really great. She went, thank you. That's what I thought. I'm just going to stay put then. And so because we stay put, we don't necessarily get the bigger role or the role for our development or the ideal role that we really want. We get the role that we have with more responsibility, with less resource, but it gives us flexibility. So to your point, we don't say anything, we just stay and we just do.
Yeah. Oh, Abby, I couldn't agree more. And I feel like it was something that really came up, the flexibility point. And I think it's crucial because what it feels like is a bit of a flexibility ceiling is the kind of thing I've spoken to people about over the past year. This idea that you're kind of on a path and then you have a child, and suddenly when you start asking for, well, let's do 4 days, or I need to do compressed, or kind of all these sort of things, it goes, not at your level. You'll have to move sideways and you have to move down. You have to take a pay cut. You have to do this. And it's this idea as well that flexibility should be equal for all, because if you make it a favour for parents, it doesn't help parents. It actually hinders them because you think, oh, they've done me a favour, so I have to be so grateful. And it's this idea that we talked about earlier of people feeling like they can't talk about mental health because they should be grateful to have a role at all. So this idea that if you really cared and want to retain great talent, which I think all organisations should want to do, if you made flexibility open for everybody, it becomes a shared agenda rather than something that's seen as a favour to parents that then traps you because you, like, to your point, well, can I leave because I can't get this level of flexibility somewhere else because I don't have that institutional memory of who I am and what I can bring, and they won't want to do it in my probation. And so people stay, and we have the numbers that show the progression isn't happening for people. And those choices are falling on women predominantly because of the way that, everything is obviously set up. So I think, there's a lot in our numbers that is a lot of red flags actually on many different levels. And I think what's really difficult, some of it, like you were saying, is incredibly emotional. It's really hard because these are people's lives. And when you see the numbers and you see the free text, you realize people are suffering, people are struggling. Um, but you also realize the extent of it. So no, these people are, sad to say, you're not alone. It's like what you were saying, these are shared challenges. Unfortunately, it's happening to a lot of people. But actually, if we can find a bit of comfort in that, and kind of say, it can feel very isolating, like you're the only one that's heading towards burnout. You're the only one who's not progressing. And it's really, really sad to say that you're not. So at least a bit of a silver lining to say, you are not an anomaly. Don't feel like you're on your own. But what is going to change? And I think, to your point, that whole like learning to say no is a really, really powerful tool in your arsenal. It's just really, really hard to do.
It's really hard to do. And I think it's really hard to do if you're seeing, job cuts happening within your organization, you're seeing job cuts happening outside, you don't want to be perceived as being difficult, there's perception issues internally around the function, all of those things. I'm not saying it's easy. It's definitely not. But as I always say, it's that whole what could you can control, what's outside your control, what's inside your control. And the one thing that's within inside your control is you. And really focusing on making sure that you're prioritizing the things that are important to you, your non-negotiables that fill up your energy cup and your well-being, making sure that you are, being proactive with that, because not only do we need that for our lives and to show up as a whole, and it's important for our well-being, it's important because we do deal with so many setbacks and changes and pivots, and all of that takes emotion and energy. And that's our brain's response. Our first thing is just flood us with emotions. That takes energy. And then you have cortisol. And then you have your adrenals are depleted. And you've got to have time and you've got processing. Like all of that happening periodically is a lot on top of everything else. And I'll drop some resources as a result from this podcast to help people with that. But I think you're right. Shining a light that we have a profession that is misunderstood, that is still needing to demonstrate its role and what it truly brings and what it should truly be doing, for people to feel really clear in their role and supported and empowered to do their roles, to have the support around them to share open and honestly with psychological safety about what it is that is impacting them, and to have the right resource around them to do what they need to do, to feel empowered with the right skills and the right tools and the wider organization to have that belief in them, and to have the right resource and investment levels to deliver what we need to deliver for the numbers. I see so many people like, here's your number for growth. It's 15% on last year. And you're like, okay, well, I have £2.50 and I have a team that's half and the market's in decline but okay. It's like, when do we start standing up for ourselves and having that negotiation that goes, actually, I appreciate you want 15%, but this is the market. This is what realistic. If we have this, this is what realistic with what you've given or what we have or what, we're left with, and start educating, advocating for ourselves. I know easier said than done. I really know easier said than done. But without that, we are going to continue this cycle. So we've talked about a lot today, Charlotte. We've talked about the changing role. We've talked about the morale, how people are feeling, the lack of progression, some of the root causes, and much, much more. Thank you. Thank you on behalf of the profession for commissioning these studies. 2,350 people got to share their voice. So thank you. It doesn't make for easy reading, but as you say, it is shining the light. And hopefully by everyone seeing it, that we collectively can start talking about what we're going to do to make it better. And for being wonderful and for sharing everything that you shared so far today. As you know, because you listen to the podcast, Charlotte, we always finish with the following question. What one piece of advice would you give to marketers of tomorrow?
Oh, well, I've thought about this, and I think I'm going to go really like big, but I'm going to say know your value, because I've written about this industry for a decade, and I've met the most stellar, intelligent, interesting, funny, clever people who bring a hell of a lot. And I know it's so difficult. Everything we discussed, I bring all the drama with all the negativity. People are questioning the role of marketing, obviously claim they could do the job themselves, cutting spend, questioning effectiveness, forcing marketers to operate quarter to quarter. This is happening, right? This is true. And there's so many reasons why you would feel like you could be done with this, but don't be. And don't be put off starting in the industry either. You might look ahead and see this looks really, really tough. I could do something else. It is so worthwhile. And marketers bring an unbelievable amount of value. It's something you said to me as well when we were talking about imposter syndrome that really stuck with me. It was this idea of, I don't know how to do that yet. And you don't need to be the finished article. You don't need to be at the start. You don't need to worry, I've got to have 5 years experience before I can even get my first job. I know that sounds really glib and it's really hard to get roles. It's really hard to stay in role. But actually, I feel like, we're all working towards something. None of us are the finished product. Nobody is, even a CMO. And you bring so much value. And the more people spend time with marketers, the more they realize that. So spend time with finance. And I don't just mean like the CFO, like at every level, like even at the most junior level, pair with bring them into what you're doing so they can see, oh, hang on, these people are whip smart. Like, let people see how smart you are. And hopefully that will make a difference. And if it doesn't, then that's not a good organization to be in. And I know, again, it's very hard to kind of leave, but then you're worth more. And that's right at the start of your career and it's right at the end. And I think, there's so much to be hopeful about. Hopefully, now, like you're saying, we can talk about this. And thank you so much for having me on to kind of, talk to your community about what's going on and about how we can get to a better place. And I really hope next year I'm talking to you and saying we've seen improvements. But yeah, my piece of advice would be know your value.
That's a great piece of advice, Charlotte. And thank you so much again for your time on today's podcast. Thank you for tuning into the Whole Marketer podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do like, follow and share with others in our marketing community so that we can create a wave of whole marketers who are successful, fulfilled in their careers and lives as a whole. To further inspire you on latest thinking, marketing approaches and technical skills, we have plenty of free resources on our website. To download these, simply visit the resources page on the Whole Marketer website. Plus, you'll also find a full range of our services that outline how we partner with marketing leaders to build teams of successful and fulfilled marketers who are supported and empowered to grow the brands and businesses of tomorrow, to lead the long-term commercial agenda and deliver on the true potential of marketing.